We use the word depressed to describe everything from a bad day to a deep, unshakable despair, as if it's all one thing. But that's like using the word sick to describe both a common cold and a life-threatening illness. It's a starting point, but it tells you almost nothing about what's really happening under the surface. The single story of depression most people know is dangerously incomplete. There isn't just one face of depression. The reality is that the official diagnostic manuals, like the DSM-5, outline several distinct depressive disorders and use what are called specifiers to describe even more variations, each with its own unique blueprint of pain and its own path toward getting better. Today we're going to look at 12 of these faces, moving beyond the stereotype to understand the complex reality of what it means to be depressed. First, let's start with the one you probably know best: major depressive disorder, or MDD. MDD doesn't just make you sad, it slowly shuts down your ability to feel pleasure, motivation, and connection, even when good things are happening around you. People think depression means crying all day. Some people with MDD do, but others barely feel anything at all. The most painful symptom is often not sadness, it's emptiness. You wake up exhausted even after 8 hours of sleep. Hobbies that once excited you suddenly feel pointless. To get a diagnosis, this state has to last for at least 2 weeks, where you feel this way most of the day, nearly every day. The worst part is that your brain starts rewriting reality, telling you that you've always felt this way and you'll always feel this way. People often say, just think positive. But MDD isn't a lack of positive thinking. Telling someone with major depression to simply cheer up is like telling a car with no fuel to drive farther. The problem isn't the effort, the problem is that the engine itself is struggling to run. Next is a form of depression triggered by a massive real-life blow, adjustment disorder with depressed mood, sometimes called situational depression. It pulls the ground out from under you after a sudden change, like losing a job, a messy divorce, or a major financial crisis. The confusing part is that this depression is a direct reaction to an event you can name. You know why you're hurting, yet knowing doesn't make the pain go away. Your brain gets stuck in a heightened survival state. Your concentration disappears, you might snap at people over tiny mistakes, and you replay the event over and over, searching for something you could have done differently. You feel entirely lost in your own routine, staring blankly at a future that no longer looks the way you planned. While the symptoms often get better once you adapt to the change or the stressor is gone, it's not about being weak for failing to bounce back. Your mind is just struggling to redraw the map of a world that changed without your permission. Now we get into a version that challenges the classic image of depression. This isn't a separate disorder, but a specifier called with atypical features that can be added to a diagnosis of major depression. Its defining trait is something called mood reactivity, where your mood can temporarily lift when something good happens, which makes the condition look less serious than it is. You might laugh with a friend and feel fine for a few hours, but the moment the good thing ends, a massive physical weight returns. Your arms and legs can literally feel like they're filled with lead. Instead of not sleeping, you might sleep 12 hours and still wake up exhausted. Instead of losing your appetite skyrockets, and you constantly crave carbohydrates. You become terrified of any slight criticism, convinced that people secretly dislike you. Friends often dismiss your struggles, saying, "I bet you seemed so happy yesterday." But this kind of depression is exhausting because of that whiplash. Being able to smile sometimes doesn't mean you're not struggling. Peripartum depression. The time around childbirth is expected to be joyful, but for many, it turns into a period of exhaustion, guilt, and emotional pain. This is formally diagnosed as major depressive disorder with peripartum onset, a specifier for depressive episodes that start during pregnancy or in the weeks after giving birth, though many experts use the term to cover the entire first year. This is much more than the baby blues. You look at your baby and might feel a scary sense of nothing at all, which instantly fills you with shame. You go through the motions of feeding and changing, but you feel completely empty. Sudden waves of panic can hit, making you believe you are a terrible parent. It happens because of a massive sudden drop in hormones right after birth, which affects brain systems that regulate mood. Family members often brush this off, which only makes the guilt worse. But you can't push through a chemical drop with a positive attitude. It's a medical condition, happening during one of the biggest physical and emotional transitions a person can experience. Imagine a quiet, heavy sadness that stretches over years of your life, until you forget what being happy actually feels like. That's persistent depressive disorder, or PDD, a condition that used to be called dysthymia. People think depression is supposed to be dramatic, but PDD works differently. It doesn't knock you down. It slowly convinces you that this low-grade grey feeling is just who you are. You still go to work, you still answer texts, but you only function just enough to get by. To be diagnosed, this state has to last for at least 2 years in adults, without a break of more than 2 months. Because it's so constant, many people with PDD just assume they have a pessimistic personality, without realizing it's a treatable condition. PDD is a quiet thief that slowly steals the color out of living, year after year. Sometimes depression is caused or worsened by alcohol, drugs, or even prescribed medications. This is substance/medication-induced depressive disorder. The confusing part is that the substance often feels like it's helping at first, but over time, the emotional cost becomes huge. Because you flooded your system with artificial highs, your brain tries to protect itself by shutting down its own happiness receptors. Once the substance leaves your system, your brain is left unable to make its own feel-good chemicals. The world suddenly feels aggressively dull. The timeline is the key clue. The depression starts during or soon after using a substance, and it's not explained by a pre-existing condition. This can happen with recreational drugs, but also with some prescribed medications for things like acne, blood pressure, or inflammation. In many cases, the symptoms get better once the substance is stopped under a doctor's care, but it's often more complicated than just stopping. We're halfway through, and if any of these descriptions are starting to sound uncomfortably familiar, please know that you're not making this up. We're a small channel, and our entire goal is to demystify these exact experiences. If you find this content valuable, subscribing is a free way to support us, and it genuinely helps us keep making videos like this one. When depression grows out of long-term trauma, like years of abuse, neglect, or emotional control, it often looks different. While complex PTSD or CPTSD is not yet an official diagnosis in the American DSM-5, it is recognized by the World Health Organization's ICD-11 and is widely used by clinicians to describe the impact of prolonged trauma. Here, the depression is a symptom of a nervous system that has been trapped in danger for so long that its alarm system has become permanently hyperactive. You constantly expect something to go wrong. Kindness feels suspicious. You struggle to trust people, then feel lonely when you keep your distance. The depression often grows from years of feeling unsafe and powerless, like a shutdown mechanism to cope with unbearable pain. People often say, that was years ago, move on. But your nervous system doesn't measure time like a calendar. This isn't about living in the past, it's about what happens when the past keeps showing up inside the present. This is one of the most critical distinctions in mental health. The depressive episodes in bipolar disorder can feel identical to MDD, the same exhaustion, hopelessness, and emptiness, but they exist in a completely different context. Bipolar disorder is defined by cycles that swing between these lows and highs of mania or hypermania, which involve intense energy, little need for sleep, and impulsive behavior. The crash from a manic episode hurts so much because you remember exactly what having endless energy felt like, just days or weeks ago. Your intense confidence flips into deep self-hatred. Making this distinction is vital because treating bipolar depression with only antidepressants is dangerous. It can trigger a manic episode. An accurate diagnosis has to look at your entire mood history, not just the depression you're in right now. For some women, depression follows a relentless monthly cycle. This is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. It's not just bad PMS, it's a severe clinical condition where hormonal shifts in the week or two before a period trigger intense depressive symptoms. You might feel fine for most of the month and then a dark switch flips. You're consumed by a hopeless depression or uncontrollable rage over tiny things. Then, almost like magic, the fog clears a day or two after your period starts, leaving you feeling guilty and confused. The defining feature is the strict repeating cycle. People often dismiss it, saying, everyone gets moody before their period, but PMDD is severe enough to disrupt your work, relationships, and daily life. It's like your brain is having a severe allergic reaction to its own natural hormones. As the days get shorter and the light fades, some people experience a predictable plunge in mood and energy. This is known as major depressive disorder with a seasonal pattern, more commonly called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. Your body acts like it's trying to hibernate. You start sleeping longer, but wake up tired. A deep sluggishness takes over. This happens because the lack of natural sunlight can break your body's internal clock, causing your brain to make too much of the sleep hormone melatonin and not enough of the mood-stabilizing chemical serotonin. You crave heavy foods and want to socially withdraw. Friends might joke that you have the winter blues, but you can't fight a confused biological clock with willpower. That's why doctors often use light therapy, using special bright lamps to trick your brain into rebalancing its chemicals. Psychotic depression. This is one of the most severe and urgent forms of depression. It's not a separate disorder, but a specifier for a major depressive episode that has become so intense it includes psychosis, a break with reality. You experience the crushing weight of depression, but also hallucinations or delusions. Crucially, these psychotic symptoms are almost always mood-congruent, meaning they match the themes of the depression. You might hear voices telling you you're worthless or become absolutely convinced that you've committed a terrible sin or are responsible for a disaster. The depressive thoughts stop feeling like opinions and start feeling like undeniable facts. This happens because the intense stress of the depression disrupts the brain pathways responsible for telling fact from fiction. It is a psychiatric emergency that requires immediate evaluation and intensive treatment. DMDD, or also known as disruptive mood dysregulation. This diagnosis was added to the DSM-5 to more accurately diagnose children and adolescents who show severe, persistent irritability. Before DMDD, many of these kids were being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but research showed they usually didn't go on to develop it as adults. The core of DMDD is not just a bad temper, it's a pattern of severe, frequent temper outbursts, verbal rages or aggression that are completely out of proportion to the situation, happening at least 3 times a week. And between these outbursts, the child's mood is consistently irritable or angry most of the day, nearly every day. The diagnosis is made for kids between 6 and 18, and it's meant to identify children who are at high risk for developing depression or anxiety disorders later on. So, there they are, 12 different ways an illness that is too often painted with a single brushstroke can show up. From the quiet, chronic fog of PDD to the cyclical storm of PMDD, from the reactive pain of an adjustment disorder to the reality-bending crisis of psychotic depression. Recognizing this diversity isn't just academic. Each of these faces requires a different way of understanding and a different approach to treatment. Depression is not a personality flaw or a lack of mental toughness. As we just covered, it is a physical, chemical, and structural change in how your brain functions. Which type of depression from this video sounded the most familiar to your own experience or someone you know? Tell me about it in the comments below.